The howl cut through the frozen Montana night like a blade through bone. Inside the Mitchell home, fire crackling, temperature outside -28 degrees, a German shepherd named Ranger placed his massive head on a dying baby's chest. Connor Mitchell, 7 months old, blonde hair matted with sweat, took shallow, rattling breaths. His parents, Sarah and Rob, clutched each other beside the bassinet, faces wet with tears they'd stopped trying to hide. It was 2:47 a.m. Valentine's Day, 2024. The machines had been turned off an hour ago. Now there was only waiting. Then, Connor's hand moved. Impossibly small fingers curled around Ranger's fur, gripping with strength no one thought he had left. The baby's blue eyes opened. He smiled. Not a grimace, not pain, peace. Outside, 200 townspeople held candles in the brutal cold, watching the house where a miracle and a tragedy were happening simultaneously. What occurred in those final hours would change Whitefish, Montana forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 7 months earlier, on a sweltering July morning in Whitefish, Sarah Mitchell sat in the pediatrician's office, staring at her 3-week-old son. Something was wrong. Connor's right arm lay motionless against his tiny body. He hadn't moved it in 2 days. Sarah was 30 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, green eyes that had seen too much during her years as a trauma nurse at Kalispell Regional. She'd quit when Connor was born, though the decision had been complicated. Connor wasn't planned. He came from violence, a parking lot, a night shift, a man whose face she'd forced herself to forget. She'd considered not keeping him. The pregnancy was a daily reminder of the worst night of her life. But then she felt him kick at 16 weeks, and something shifted. He was fighting to exist. She could fight too. Robert Mitchell, 33 and weathered beyond his years, sat beside her. Rob stood 6'2", with gray creeping into his temples despite his youth, a souvenir from 2 tours in Afghanistan. He worked as a park ranger at Glacier National Park, spending days in the mountains he'd returned to after the war, seeking peace and wilderness. He'd met Sarah during a mountain rescue 2 years ago, pulling her from a hiking accident. 6 months later, she told him about the rape, the pregnancy, the fear. His response was immediate. "I choose you. I choose him." Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. They married 4 months before Connor arrived. Doctor. Catherine Brennan entered the exam room, her expression carefully neutral. Kate was 45, competent, respected throughout Whitefish. She examined Connor with practiced efficiency, then ordered tests Sarah recognized from her nursing training, the kind of tests that meant serious problems. 3 hours later, they had a diagnosis: spinal muscular atrophy type 1. A genetic lottery nobody wins. Both parents carried the recessive gene, 1 in 100 odds. Their son drew the unlucky combination. Kate's words came clinical and careful. The SMN1 gene mutation causes motor neurons to deteriorate. Connor's muscles will weaken progressively. Most children with SMA type 1 don't live past 2 years. Sarah felt her chest constrict. Rob's hand found hers, squeezing hard. "There's a treatment," Kate continued. "Spinraza. It's new, promising." "How much?" Rob asked, already knowing the answer would hurt. $750,000 for the first year. The number hung in the air like smoke. Rob made $45,000 annually. Their savings held $12,000. Insurance covered 60%, leaving them $300,000 short. Sarah stared at Connor, memorizing his face. Blonde hair, blue eyes, perfect except for the invisible flaw destroying him from inside. "We'll find a way," Rob said, his voice carrying the certainty of a man trained to complete missions. "We don't surrender." but Sarah saw the fear behind his eyes, mirroring her own. The drive home from Kalispell stretched 40 minutes through winding mountain roads. Sarah sat in silence, staring at Connor's car seat. The baby slept, oblivious to the death sentence hanging over him. Rob's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched in that way she recognized. He was calculating, planning, refusing to accept defeat. When they pulled into their driveway, Ranger was waiting at the door. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, 85 pounds of muscle and loyalty, with a black and tan coat and a scarred left ear from his military service. Rob had brought him home from Afghanistan 3 years ago after an IED blast left the dog with hearing damage and mild PTSD. They'd saved each other, really. Rob from his nightmares, Ranger from being put down when the Army deemed him unfit for continued service. Ranger's ears perked up as Rob carried Connor's carrier inside. The dog approached cautiously, something shifting in his demeanor. He'd been nervous around the baby initially, the crying triggered his trauma, but now he moved with purpose, sniffing the carrier intently. Sarah watched as Ranger settled beside Connor, lying down with his head near the baby's feet. The dog's brown eyes held an alertness she'd never seen before. "He knows," Rob said quietly. "He can smell it, the disease." Sarah's medical training kicked in. She'd read about dogs detecting illness, chemical changes in the body, imperceptible to humans, but obvious to a trained nose. Ranger had been an explosive detection specialist in Afghanistan. If he could smell C4, he could certainly detect the molecular chaos destroying Connor's motor neurons. That night, Sarah lay awake doing calculations that wouldn't add up. Park ranger salary, $45,000. Their cabin was small, mortgaged, maybe $50,000 in equity. Savings, $12,000. Medical bills from Connor's birth, still paying those off. The math was impossible. Rob sat at the kitchen table until 3 a.m., laptop glow illuminating his face. He was researching GoFundMe campaigns, medical loans, clinical trials. Sarah heard him on the phone with the Spinraza manufacturer, his voice steady and professional, asking about payment plans and compassionate care programs. At 2 a.m., Connor cried, a weak, breathy sound that barely registered on the baby monitor. But before Sarah could get up, she heard Ranger scratching at the nursery door. By the time she reached the room, the German Shepherd was sitting beside the crib, alert and watchful. "How did you know before the monitor?" Sarah whispered, checking Connor's diaper. Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeated. Ranger predicted every need before the technology could. He refused to leave Connor's side except for necessary bathroom breaks. When Rob tried to take him for their usual morning walk, Ranger planted his paws and wouldn't budge. "He's on duty now," Rob observed. "Like he was in Afghanistan. He's found his mission." Sarah watched the dog's gentle vigilance. Despite his imposing size, Ranger moved with careful precision around the baby. When Connor reached out with his tiny hand, the left one that still worked, and grabbed Ranger's fur, the dog froze, letting the baby hold on. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "He's not afraid. Connor's not afraid with Ranger here." By the end of the week, news had spread through Whitefish. In a town of 7,000, secrets didn't exist. Pastor John from the Lutheran church called, offering prayers. Neighbors appeared with casseroles, the Montana way of saying, "We're here," without needing words. Mrs. Hayes from down the street, an elderly widow, stood on their porch with a tuna noodle dish. "That dog of yours," she said, nodding toward Ranger, visible through the window. "He's seen death. Probably plenty of it overseas. Now he's trying to stop it." The local newspaper ran a story. "Local family faces unthinkable diagnosis." Within hours, the Whitefish community Facebook group exploded. Comments ranged from supportive to painful. Praying for baby Connor. God's plan isn't always what we want, but it's always what we need. Why would you bring a child into the world knowing he'd suffer? Sarah read them until Rob stopped her, closing her laptop. Don't. We know what we're doing. But did they? That night, as Sarah held Connor against her chest, feeling his weak breaths, she wondered if love was enough. If determination could overcome genetics. If $300,000 could somehow materialize from their empty bank account. Rob's estranged father called, first contact in 10 years. I heard, he said simply. I was wrong about you, about Sarah, about everything. What do you need? Sarah's mother, Linda, arrived from Billings the next morning, filling the house with talk of faith healers and prayer circles. Medicine isn't the only answer, she insisted. The battle lines were drawing themselves, family, community, faith, and science, all circling a 7-pound baby who just wanted to live. Rob created the GoFundMe campaign on a Thursday evening, Sarah sitting beside him as they crafted words that would ask strangers to save their son's life. The goal seemed impossible. $300,000. Sarah wrote the description, her nursing background helping her balance clinical accuracy with emotional truth. Our 7-week-old son Connor has been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy type 1. Without treatment, he has months to live. With Spinraza, he has a chance. We're asking for help to give our baby boy that chance. Rob uploaded a photo. Connor sleeping, Ranger's head resting protectively beside the bassinet. He hit publish at 9 p.m. By midnight, they'd raised $15,000. Sarah refreshed the page obsessively, watching donations scroll past. $50 from Mary Chen, a retired schoolteacher. $100 from Anonymous. $25 from Widow Johnson, with a note. This is my grocery money for the month. Connor needs it more. The widow's donation broke Sarah. She pressed her face into Rob's shoulder and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of people's goodness. Local news picked up the story by Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, the total hit 50,000. By Monday, 100,000. Sarah allowed herself a dangerous emotion. Hope. Maybe they could actually afford treatment. Maybe Connor would see his 2nd birthday, his 5th, his graduation. That afternoon, Margaret Chen knocked on their door. She was 72, a widow who lived 3 houses down. Sarah had seen her at the grocery store but never really talked beyond pleasantries. I brought soup, Maggie said, holding out a container. Chicken and rice, my grandmother's recipe. Sarah invited her in, grateful for the company. Maggie set the soup in the kitchen, then asked quietly, "May I see him?" Connor was in his bassinet, awake and tracking movement with his eyes, one of the few things his deteriorating muscles could still do. Maggie approached slowly. Then her composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her weathered face. "He looks just like my Jackson," she whispered. The story emerged over tea. Maggie's grandson had died 30 years ago, sudden infant death syndrome at 2 months old. Her son lived in California now, rarely called. Her daughter was in New York, too busy with her career. Maggie had moved to Whitefish 3 years ago after her husband died from Alzheimer's, intending to live out her remaining years in quiet isolation. "I have too much time," Maggie said. "Too much empty time. If you'd let me, I'd like to help. I could bring meals, do laundry, sit with Connor when you need to shower. I need to feel useful again." Sarah hesitated only a moment before accepting. Over the following days, Maggie became a constant presence. She arrived each morning with breakfast, stayed through lunch, sometimes into evening. She sang old lullabies Sarah didn't recognize, held Connor with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, and gave Sarah permission to be human, to shower, to sleep, to cry. Ranger accepted Maggie immediately, which was remarkable for a protective dog. When she held Connor, Ranger would lie at her feet, vigilant but calm. "I came to Whitefish to die alone," Maggie admitted one afternoon while folding laundry. "Connor's giving me a reason to stay alive." Meanwhile, the GoFundMe continued growing. 120,000, then 140. But it plateaued there, donations slowing to a trickle. Still 160,000 short. Pastor John called a town meeting at the high school gym. 300 people showed up on a Wednesday evening. He stood at the microphone, Connor's story projected on a screen behind him. "We have neighbors in crisis," he began. "A baby fighting for his life. A family drowning in medical debt. What are we going to do about it?" The response was immediate. Ideas flooded forth. Weekly bake sales, Saturday car washes, a charity basketball game where admission would be donated. The local brewery offered to create Connor's Courage Ale, with proceeds going to the family. The quilting circle would auction their work. But not everyone agreed. Ed Morrison, who owned the hardware store, stood up. "Are we enabling false hope? The statistics say most SMA babies die anyway. Are we just prolonging suffering?" A teenage girl in the front row, Sarah didn't know her name, shot to her feet. "Are we supposed to just let him die? What kind of community does that?" The gym erupted in heated debate. Quality versus quantity of life. Medical intervention versus natural course. The philosophical became personal, voices rising. Then Linda stood up. Sarah's mother had been sitting quietly in the back, but now she walked to the microphone. "My grandson doesn't need medicine. He needs faith. God will heal Connor if we believe strongly enough." Sarah felt rage ignite in her chest. She stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "God gave us doctors for a reason, Mom. I'm not going to pray my son to death." The gym went silent. Mother and daughter stared at each other across the crowd, years of tension crystallizing in this moment. Pastor John intervened gently. "Faith and medicine aren't enemies. We can pray and fundraise. God works through human hands, too." The majority agreed. Within a week, the first bake sale raised $3,200. Car washes brought in $1,800. The basketball game drew the whole town, $5,000 in donations. Montana's governor tweeted support, and suddenly the campaign was statewide. The total climbed 150,000, 170. Rob sold his truck for $15,000. Sarah sold her wedding dress and jewelry for $3,000. Rob's father, still estranged but trying, anonymously wired $20,000. By mid-September, they had $188,000, still short, but close enough to begin treatment. The first Spinraza injection was scheduled for October 15th. For the first time since diagnosis, Sarah let herself believe they might win this fight. But during Connor's pre-treatment consultation, Dr. Kate Brennan pulled Sarah aside in the hospital corridor. Her demeanor had shifted, less clinical, more personal. "I need you to understand something about Spinraza," Kate said quietly. "It doesn't cure SMA, it slows progression. Average life extension is 6 to 18 months. Sarah's defenses rose. Every day matters. Even if he's suffering, he's not suffering. He's living." Kate's hand trembled slightly. "I've seen this before. I just want you to understand what you're choosing." Something haunted lived in Kate's eyes, but Sarah was too angry to care. She left the conversation shaken, and when she told Rob, he dismissed it. "She's being realistic. Doctors have to be." But doubt had planted itself, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Kate knew something she wasn't saying. The first Spinraza injection happened on October 15th, a Tuesday morning at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Connor was 3 months old, small for his age, his muscles already visibly wasting. The procedure required a spinal tap, a needle inserted between vertebrae into the fluid surrounding the spinal cord. Sarah held Connor while the nurses positioned him. Rob held Sarah, his hands on her shoulders, steadying them both. Connor cried, but his lungs were too weak for the sound to carry much volume. It was a thin, breathy wail that shattered Sarah's heart more completely than any scream could have. Ranger waited in the parking lot, confined to Rob's new used car. But the veterinary tech monitoring him through the window reported that the dog paced continuously, whining as though he could sense Connor's distress 2 floors up. The procedure took 20 minutes. Afterward, Connor slept for 16 hours straight, his tiny body exhausted from the trauma and the medication flooding his system. Sarah didn't sleep at all, sitting beside his hospital bassinet, counting his breaths. On day 3, post-treatment, she noticed the change. Connor's grip strength had improved, not dramatically, but measurably. When she placed her finger in his left hand, he squeezed with slightly more force. His eye tracking was sharper, following her face as she moved. He seemed more alert, more present. By day 5, the improvement was undeniable. The physical therapist confirmed it. Muscle tone had stabilized, even increased marginally in some areas. It wasn't a cure, his right arm still lay motionless, but it was something. Hope crystallized into evidence. Rob posted an update on GoFundMe. Connor received his first treatment. It's working. We can see the difference. Thank you for giving our son this chance. The post went viral. The video Sarah had recorded of Connor gripping her finger, demonstrating the improvement, was shared 500,000 times within 48 hours. Comments flooded in from across the country, across the world, prayers in English, Spanish, Mandarin. Donations surged again, pushing the total past 200,000. The church bell in Whitefish rang spontaneously when news spread through town. Maggie baked a 3-layer celebration cake. Even Ed Morrison, from the hardware store, who'd questioned the fundraising, stopped by with a stuffed bear for Connor. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Keep fighting." Ranger's behavior shifted too. The constant vigilance eased slightly. He began playing again, gentle games with Connor's soft toys, bringing them to the bassinet as though offering gifts. When Connor managed to vocalize, a coo, a babble, Ranger's tail wagged. Sarah documented everything in a journal. Every small victory, every gram of weight gained, every new sound Connor made. She filmed the physical therapy sessions where a specialist worked Connor's limbs through careful exercises designed to maintain what muscle function remained. Ranger watched these sessions with intense focus. Then, remarkably, he began mimicking them. When the therapist would gently extend Connor's leg, Ranger would nudge the baby's other leg with his nose. When fingers were stretched, Ranger would lick Connor's hand, encouraging movement. "Your dog could be a physical therapist," the specialist joked, but there was wonder in her voice. "I've never seen animal therapy work quite like this." The local news picked up the story. War dog becomes dying baby's therapist. By November, it had gone national. The Today Show requested an interview. Rob and Sarah declined. They wanted privacy for their family, not fame. But the attention brought more donations, more support, more strangers invested in Connor's survival. November brought the second treatment. Connor tolerated it better this time, crying less, recovering faster. The improvements continued. He could hold small toys briefly now, batting at the mobile above his changing table with his left hand. His vocalizations increased, coos becoming babbles, babbles approaching something like syllables. Sarah allowed herself to imagine futures she'd forbidden herself from considering. Connor at 1 year old, maybe sitting up with support. At 2, possibly taking steps with a walker. At 5, starting kindergarten in a wheelchair, but alive, present, hers. Then December arrived, and with it, Montana winter. The first blizzard hit on December 3rd. Temperature plummeted from 20 degrees to -15 overnight. Snow fell in sheets, accumulating 3 feet in 48 hours. Roads became impassable ice sheets. Whitefish, already isolated by geography, became completely cut off. On December 5th, Connor developed a fever. Sarah checked it repeatedly, 99.8, then 100.2, then 100.9. His breathing, already compromised, became rattling and shallow. Respiratory infections were common in SMA babies and frequently fatal. Their weak chest muscles couldn't generate enough force to cough effectively, leading to pneumonia. Sarah called Dr. Brennan in a panic. Kate's voice remained calm, clinical. "Start antibiotics. Monitor his oxygen levels. If they drop below 90%, he needs hospitalization." "The roads are closed," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "We can't get to Kalispell." "Then you treat him at home. You're a nurse, Sarah. You know what to do." But knowing and doing were different when it was your own child. Sarah set up Connor's nursery like a mini ICU, oxygen machine borrowed from the medical supply store, pulse oximeter on his tiny toe, humidifier running constantly. She gave antibiotics every 6 hours, measured to the milliliter. Maggie moved in temporarily, sleeping on the couch, taking shifts so Sarah could rest. Rob took unpaid leave from the park service. Money was hemorrhaging again. Oxygen rental $500 monthly, antibiotics $300, supplies $200, lost income $3,000, but none of that mattered if Connor died. Ranger never left the nursery. He lay beside the bassinet continuously, only moving when physically carried outside for bathroom breaks. His eyes stayed open, watchful, as though his vigilance alone could keep death away. For 3 days, Connor burned with fever. His oxygen levels hovered at 91%, not critical but terrifyingly close. Sarah didn't sleep, surviving on coffee and adrenaline and prayer. She'd stopped praying after the rape, but now she found herself whispering into the darkness. "Please, please don't take him. Please." On December 8th, the fever broke. Connor's temperature dropped to 99.1. Then 98.6. His breathing eased. Color returned to his pale cheeks. The antibiotics had worked. Sarah collapsed into Rob's arms, sobbing with relief. Maggie made pancakes, comfort food, celebration food. Even Ranger seemed to relax, his body finally sagging with exhaustion, but the scare had cost them. The GoFundMe was tapped out at $220,000. Medical bills totaled $230,000 and climbing. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The foreclosure warning arrived on December 10th. Rob took a second job, working as a night security guard at the hospital from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., then his park ranger shift from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. He slept 4 hours a day. Sarah watched him deteriorate, weight dropping, eyes hollow, movements mechanical. "You're killing yourself," she said one morning when he stumbled getting coffee. "If I don't work, we lose the house," he replied. "Where will Connor?" He didn't finish the sentence. The truth hung unspoken. Connor might not need the house much longer anyway. News of their financial crisis spread through Whitefish. Pastor John called another emergency meeting. This time, 400 people showed up despite the snow. The town organized a coordinated assault on poverty, simultaneous bake sales at 3 locations, a 24-hour car wash marathon, an art auction featuring local artists. Within 1 week, they raised $40,000. Anonymous donors contributed too. One check arrived for $30,000 with no return address. Rob's brother Kyle showed up at their door the next day. "That was you," Rob said, recognizing his brother's handwriting on the envelope. Kyle nodded. "I sold my house. I was wrong about everything. About Sarah, about you raising another man's kid, about you wasting your life. Family matters more than real estate." The brothers embraced for the first time in 5 years, both crying. Kyle moved into their spare room that night, helping with Connor, giving Rob and Sarah moments to breathe. The total now stood at $210,000 raised against $240,000 spent. They were staying afloat by fingernails, but they were still afloat. Christmas arrived with mixed blessings. Connor was 4.5 months old, already exceeding some predictions. The town decorated the Mitchell house without asking permission. Lights, wreaths, a tree visible through their window. Carolers came on Christmas Eve, singing in the bitter cold. Christmas morning, Connor wore a red Santa hat that kept sliding over his eyes. Presents were opened, toys he couldn't play with, clothes he'd hopefully grow into. Rob's father appeared at the door unannounced, the first time he'd visited in 10 years. "I was wrong," the older man said when Rob answered. "About Sarah, about accepting Connor, about all of it." "Can I meet my grandson?" Rob hesitated, old wounds aching, then stepped aside. His father held Connor with shaking hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He's beautiful, just like you were." Reconciliation happened in silence, in the shared understanding that time was precious and grudges were luxuries dying babies couldn't afford. Linda was there too, still pushing her faith-healing agenda. She brought a church elder who prayed over Connor, anointing him with oil, declaring healing by faith. Sarah allowed it for peace, though her eyes rolled so hard Rob thought they might stick. Midway through the prayer, Connor urinated, soaking through his diaper and the elder's sleeve. Maggie burst out laughing. "That's Connor's answer to your prayer." The tension broke. Everyone laughed, even Linda. For a moment, they were just a family celebrating Christmas, the shadow of death temporarily forgotten. That night, Connor's oxygen alarm shrieked. Sarah and Rob rushed in to find his levels at 88%, his lips tinged blue. They increased oxygen flow, adjusted his position, waited with held breath until the numbers climbed. 89, 90, 92. Crisis averted, but barely. The wake-up call was clear. Time was running out. On New Year's Day, the town gathered at the park for a bonfire despite -20 temperatures. Rob stood with Connor bundled against his chest when an older man approached. "I'm Frank Harris," the man said. "I served with your father in Vietnam. Heard about your boy." Frank was 68, weathered like old leather, with haunted eyes that Rob recognized, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. Frank's story emerged in halting sentences: 2 tours in Vietnam, Purple Heart recipient, 50 years of PTSD, alcoholic sober, only 2 years, wife and kids long gone. "I've been alone a long time," Frank said, staring at Connor. "Thought I was done mattering. Then I heard about this little fighter. Mind if I visit sometime?" Sarah was hesitant when Rob asked, but Rob vouched for him. Frank came the next day, bringing a hand-carved wooden dog he'd made. He sat with Connor for an hour, barely speaking, just present. Ranger lay beside Frank's feet, acceptance from a protective dog that rarely gave it. Frank's visits became routine, 3 times weekly, reading old books, sharing edited war stories, simply being there. His nightmares decreased. He started attending the veteran support group again. One afternoon he told Sarah, "I thought I was done. Connor reminds me I'm still here for a reason." Frank brought other veterans. Soon a rotation of old soldiers visited Connor, finding purpose in a baby's fight. The media covered it. Unlikely heroes, veterans, and Connor. Frank reluctantly became a spokesperson. "War taught me everyone's fighting battles," he said in one interview. "Connor's battle is bigger than mine ever was. Least I can do is stand guard." January brought Connor's 4th treatment and a harsh truth. He wasn't responding anymore. The improvements had plateaued, then reversed. Muscle tone decreased again. His weight dropped from 14 pounds to 11. He slept 20 hours daily. Dr. Kate Brennan delivered the assessment with clinical gentleness. His body's building resistance to Spinraza. It happens. We can try alternative treatments. Gene therapy is experimental, costs over $1 million, has a 2-year wait list. We could add a ventilator, extend life by weeks, but quality would be... She trailed off. The unspoken word hung there. Palliative. Sarah refused to hear it. We don't give up. Rob, exhausted and realistic, said quietly, we might need to talk about comfort care. There's nothing to talk about, Sarah snapped. We don't give up. Their first real fight happened that night. Rob's words, I know when someone's dying, Sarah. I watched it in Afghanistan, were cut off by Sarah slamming the nursery door. She slept beside Connor's bassinet. Ranger paced between rooms, whining, caught between the two people he loved who were hurting each other. Maggie mediated the next morning, forcing them to sit, to talk, to admit their terror. Sarah confessed she was terrified of losing Connor. Rob admitted he was more terrified of Connor suffering needlessly. They agreed on a fragile compromise. Continue treatment while focusing on comfort. Don't stop fighting, but prepare for the possibility of losing. Neither wanted to define what prepare meant. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud. On a frigid January evening, Sarah found Dr. Kate Brennan in Connor's nursery. The door had been closed. Sarah had been in the kitchen making bottles when she heard Ranger's low growl, a sound he'd never made in their home. She rushed upstairs to find Kate standing over Connor's bassinet, holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. The doctor's hand trembled. Connor slept, oblivious. What are you doing? Sarah's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. Kate dropped the syringe. It hit the hardwood floor, cracked but didn't break. She staggered backward, hands rising to her face. I wasn't... Get away from my son. Sarah positioned herself between Kate and the bassinet. Ranger stood beside her, teeth bared, protective stance engaged. Kate collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Sobs racked her body, raw, broken sounds that didn't match the composed doctor Sarah knew. Rob appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, the syringe on the floor, Kate crying, Sarah shielding Connor, Ranger on guard. What happened? He demanded. Kate looked up, mascara streaking her face. I need to tell you about my son. The story spilled out in fragments. 8 years ago, Kate had a son named Liam. He was diagnosed with SMA type 1 at 6 weeks old. Kate, a doctor who believed in science above all else, threw everything at the disease. Experimental drugs, clinical trials. She went $400,000 into debt. She kept Liam alive for 8 additional months through aggressive intervention. But he suffered, Kate whispered. Every day he hurt. I could see it in his eyes. He couldn't tell me with words, but I knew. At 8 months, Liam's occupational therapist taught him to use a letterboard, pointing to yes or no, basic communication for a baby whose body was failing. One afternoon, Liam spelled out a message, letter by agonizing letter, HURTSSTOPLETGO. He was begging me, Kate said, her voice hollow. My baby was begging me to let him die. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready. I kept him on machines for another month. When he finally died, he was scared. In pain. He died hating me. Sarah felt her anger wavering, replaced by something more complicated. Horror, sympathy, understanding she didn't want to feel. Kate continued, I see Liam every time I look at Connor. The same disease, the same trajectory. I thought if I could make you stop treatment earlier, I could save Connor from what I did to Liam. I thought I was protecting him. Were you going to hurt my son? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. No, Kate looked genuinely horrified. God, no. I was standing there holding morphine for his pain management and I just froze. I started remembering Liam. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Rob's voice was steel. You need to leave. Now. You're not Connor's doctor anymore. Kate nodded, pulling herself to her feet. She looked at Sarah with red-rimmed eyes. You're giving Connor what I never gave Liam. Peace surrounded by love, not pain surrounded by guilt. I was wrong to interfere. I was projecting my trauma onto you. She left, and they heard her car start in the driveway, tires crunching on frozen snow. Sarah sank into the rocking chair, adrenaline draining away, leaving her hollow. Rob knelt beside her, and they held each other in silence. Ranger returned to his position beside Connor, vigilant once more. Do we report her? Sarah asked. Rob considered. She lost her son. She's broken, but she could hurt someone else. They decided to request a new doctor but not file an official complaint. Kate needed help, not punishment. The next day, Dr. Michael Anderson took over Connor's care, a kind man in his 50s who'd lost his own daughter to leukemia years ago and carried that loss with gentle understanding. But Kate's story wasn't over. The following Sunday, she stood up during the Lutheran church service. Pastor John was mid-sermon when Kate walked to the front, her face pale but resolute. I need to confess something, she said into the microphone. The congregation fell silent. Sarah and Rob, sitting in the back with Connor, exchanged alarmed glances. Kate told everything. Her son Liam, the aggressive treatment, his suffering, the letterboard message, her guilt, her interference with Connor's care, the morphine syringe. She laid herself bare before 400 people, tears streaming, voice breaking. I almost hurt that baby because I couldn't forgive myself for hurting mine, she concluded. Connor's parents are better than I was. They're giving him love, not just life extension. I failed my son. I won't fail theirs by interfering anymore. The congregation divided instantly. Some called for her medical license to be revoked. Others offered grace. Arguments erupted across pews. Mercy versus justice, forgiveness versus accountability. Pastor John intervened. Hurt people, but healing people heal people. Kate needs our help, not our judgment. Kate announced she was starting a foundation, Liam and Connor's Peace. It would provide end-of-life doulas for families with terminally ill children, fund therapy dog programs, offer counseling. She'd already donated $50,000 of her own money to start it. I can't undo what I did to Liam, she said, but I can honor him by helping other families do it right. That afternoon, a letter arrived at the Mitchell home. Kate's handwriting covered 3 pages, detailed apology, explanation of Liam's story, plans for the foundation. I want Connor to be the co-founder in name, she wrote. His legacy and Liam's, together, if you'll allow it. Sarah read the letter twice, crying through both readings. Rob asked, Do you forgive her? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, but I understand her. That's something. Meanwhile, Connor continued declining. By early February, he'd stopped eating. His swallow reflex had weakened to the point where bottles posed a choking risk. A nasogastric tube was placed, snaking through his nose into his stomach, delivering formula directly. He lost 3 more pounds, his tiny body becoming skeletal. He slept 22 hours daily now, waking only briefly, eyes unfocused. The physical therapist stopped coming. There was no point. Connor couldn't move anything except his eyes, and even that was labored. Dr. Anderson visited on February 8th. He examined Connor gently, then pulled Sarah and Rob aside in the kitchen. Days, he said quietly. Maybe a week. His body is shutting down. We can keep him on the feeding tube, but... He paused, choosing words carefully. It's time to talk about comfort measures only. Hospice care. Letting him go peacefully. Sarah felt the floor drop away beneath her. Rob's hand found hers, gripping tight. Valentine's Day, Sarah heard herself say. If we're going to, if it's time, let it be Valentine's Day, the day of love. Dr. Anderson nodded. I'll arrange hospice. We'll make sure he's comfortable, no pain. That night, Sarah and Rob made the hardest decision of their lives. On February 14th, they would remove the feeding tube and let Connor's body finish the journey it had been fighting for 7 months. The town was informed. Despite temperatures hovering around -25 degrees, people began gathering outside the Mitchell home on February 13th, holding candles, singing hymns, bearing witness to a family's private agony made public by love. Inside, the family assembled. Sarah, Rob, Maggie, Frank, Kyle, Linda, Pastor John, and Ranger, lying beside Connor's bassinet, head resting on the edge, brown eyes watchful. At 2 a.m. on February 14th, the tube was removed. Connor's breathing became his own again, shallow, irregular, but natural. Everyone took turns saying goodbye, whispering love into his ear, pressing kisses to his forehead. Ranger remained motionless beside him, a sentinel to the last. Connor's breathing slowed through the early morning hours of February 14th. Each inhale came shallower than the last, each exhale longer, as though he was learning how to let go. Outside, 200 people held vigil in -28-degree cold, their candles flickering against the brutal wind, their presence a blanket of collective grief wrapped around one small house. Inside, time moved differently. Rob held Sarah, who held Connor. The baby lay in her arms, wrapped in the blue blanket from the hospital, the one they'd brought him home in 7 months ago. His skin had taken on a translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath paper-thin flesh. His lips, once pink, had faded to pale lavender. "Stay with me, baby," Sarah whispered, though she knew staying was the last thing she should ask of him. "Mama's here, Daddy's here. You're not alone." Ranger lifted his head from where it rested beside Connor. The German Shepherd's eyes were alert despite 4 hours of motionless vigil. He sniffed Connor's hand, then gently licked the tiny fingers. At 2:47 a.m., something shifted. Connor's breathing pattern changed from irregular gasps to something almost peaceful. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed intentional, as though he'd finally figured out how to do this hard thing with grace. Then his hand moved. Sarah gasped. Connor's left hand, the one that had retained some function, lifted slightly and curled around Ranger's fur. His fingers gripped with surprising strength, holding on. "Rob," Sarah breathed. "He's—" Connor's eyes opened. They'd been closed for hours, and everyone had assumed they'd stay that way. But now they opened, blue and clear, more focused than they'd been in weeks. He looked at Ranger first. His mouth curved upward, not a grimace, not a reflex, but an unmistakable smile. The kind of smile that reached his eyes, that transformed his entire face into something luminous. "He's smiling," Maggie whispered from where she stood near the wall, hand over her mouth. "Oh my God, he's smiling." The doctors had said this was impossible. Connor's facial muscles were too weak. He hadn't smiled in a month, but here he was, defying medical certainty with what looked like joy. Connor's gaze shifted from Ranger to Sarah. His lips moved, forming shapes that might have been words if his vocal cords had strength. Sarah leaned closer, her ear near his mouth. Ran. The sound was barely breath, but she heard it, Connor's first and last word. Ran for Ranger. Then, Ma, Da. Sarah's tears fell onto Connor's face. We're here, baby. We're right here. Connor's eyes moved to someone behind Sarah. His smile widened, his gaze tracking something no one else could see. His lips formed words Sarah couldn't quite catch. It sounded like Grandma Jackson. Maggie made a strangled sound. She pushed forward, staring at Connor with wide, disbelieving eyes. What did he say? Sarah looked at her, confused. It sounded like Grandma Jackson? That's what my grandson called me, Maggie whispered. Before he died, 30 years ago. No one told Connor that name. No one. The room fell silent except for Connor's breathing. Everyone stared at the baby, at his unfocused eyes looking at something beyond them, at his smile that seemed directed at someone they couldn't see. Rob felt the hair on his arm stand up. He didn't believe in ghosts, in heaven, in anything he couldn't touch. But his son was seeing something, and whatever it was brought him peace. Connor's hand loosened its grip on Ranger's fur. His chest rose one more time, a deep, full breath that seemed to fill his whole body. Then it released, slow and steady, like a sigh of relief, and stopped. Sarah's wail tore through the house. It was a sound from somewhere primal, the cry of a mother losing her child, guttural and raw and completely uncontained. She pulled Connor against her chest, rocking, sobbing his name over and over. Rob wrapped himself around both of them, his body shaking with silent sobs. Maggie collapsed into a chair, crying into her hands. Frank stood at attention, hand over his heart, tears streaming down his weathered face. Kyle turned away, shoulders heaving. Linda dropped to her knees, praying through gasps. Pastor John placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder and whispered words that were meant to comfort, but couldn't possibly reach through the wall of grief. Only Ranger didn't move. The German Shepherd kept his head exactly where it had been, resting on the edge of the bassinet beside Connor's body. His eyes were open, watching the baby's still face. His body trembled, small, nearly imperceptible shakes that might have been exhaustion or might have been something else. Ranger, Rob said gently after several minutes. Come here, boy. Ranger didn't budge. Rob tried to pull him away, but the dog growled, low and warning, without taking his eyes off Connor. Rob backed off, hands raised. Let him stay, Sarah whispered. He needs to do this. So they left Ranger there. The hospice nurse arrived, confirmed what everyone already knew, recorded the time. 2:47 a.m., February 14th, 2024. Connor. James Mitchell, 7 months old, died peacefully at home, surrounded by love. People began making phone calls, arranging things, moving with the practiced motions of necessary tasks. But through it all, Ranger remained motionless beside Connor's body, head on the bassinet, keeping watch. Outside, when word reached the vigil, a collective sound of grief rose into the frozen air. Candles were held higher. Someone started singing Amazing Grace, and 200 voices joined in, rough with cold and sorrow. The song carried through the walls into the nursery, where a war dog refused to leave his fallen charge, where a mother clutched her baby's body, where a father tried to hold his family together with shaking hands. Connor was gone, but somehow, in that room, love remained, stubborn and fierce and absolutely unbreakable. Ranger would stay beside Connor for 4 more hours, refusing food, water, and every attempt to move him. Only when the funeral home arrived at 6:47 a.m., as dawn broke pink and gold over the Rockies, would he finally stand, touch his nose to Connor's forehead one last time, and step away. His job was done. But the grief was just beginning. 24 hours after Connor died, Sarah found the box. She'd gone to his closet to get the blue blanket, the one from the hospital, the one he'd died wrapped in, to place in his casket. Ranger followed her, limping badly now, his protective instinct still active even though there was nothing left to protect. The closet door stuck slightly. When Sarah pulled it open, Ranger immediately sat down and whined, staring at the upper shelf. Sarah had to stand on her toes to see what he was looking at. A wooden box sat there, pushed back against the wall. She didn't recognize it. The craftsmanship was beautiful. Hand-carved cedar with Connor's full name engraved on the lid. Connor James Mitchell. Her hands shook as she lifted it down. It was heavier than expected. When she opened it, she found dozens of envelopes, each one addressed in careful handwriting to different people. To Mom. To Dad. To Ranger. To Maggie. To Frank. To Dr. Kate. To Whitefish. More names she recognized: Kyle, Linda, Pastor John, neighbors, friends. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat on the floor, the box in her lap, trying to understand. Connor had been 7 months old. He couldn't write. He could barely move. How could these letters exist? Rob found her there 20 minutes later, still staring at the envelopes, tears streaming silently down her face. She held one out to him without speaking. He opened the envelope addressed to him. Inside, on simple white paper, was a letter. The handwriting was adult, typed actually, but formatted as though from Connor. "Dad?" it began. Rob's voice broke on the word. He had to start over twice before he could continue reading aloud. "You're my real dad. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. Thank you for choosing me when you didn't have to. Thank you for loving Mom even when it was hard. Thank you for staying when everything in you wanted to run. I know you did. I know you're a runner. You ran from your father, you ran from the war in your head, you ran from things that hurt. But you didn't run from me. That's what makes you my dad. I'll be waiting for you. Tell Ranger he's the best boy. I love you. Connor." Rob's knees buckled. He sat down hard beside Sarah, the letter shaking in his hands. "How?" he whispered. "How could he know about my father? About me running?" Sarah opened hers with trembling fingers. "Mom, don't be sad I died. Be happy you loved me. All kids want is to be loved, and you gave me everything. I wasn't a mistake. I know where I came from. I know what happened to you in that parking lot. But I was never a punishment. I was always a choice. Your choice. You chose life when you could have chosen otherwise. You chose me when you could have chosen easier. Thank you for that. Thank you for fighting so hard. Thank you for letting me go when the fight was over. You're going to be a mom again. Take care of my sister. Tell her about me. Your son, Connor." Sarah's hands flew to her stomach. She hadn't told anyone. She'd only taken the test 3 days ago, hadn't even processed it herself. How could a letter written weeks or months ago know she was pregnant, know it was a girl? They called everyone to the house. Maggie arrived first, then Frank, then Kyle and Linda. When they were all gathered in the living room, the same room where Connor had died, Sarah distributed the letters. Maggie opened hers and immediately collapsed into sobs. "Grandma Maggie," it read. "That's what I call you in my heart. Tell Jackson I said hello. I saw him. He's happy. He's waiting for you, but not yet. You're needed here. You matter so much. Don't forget that. You're my grandma, and I'm your grandson, and love doesn't end just because life does. Thank you for the soup and the songs and the love. Your grandson, Connor." "How did he know Jackson's name?" Maggie gasped. "No one ever told him. We never talked about Jackson around Connor." Frank's hands shook so badly he could barely unfold his letter. When he read it, tears streamed into his gray beard. "Mr. Frank, you're a hero. War didn't break you. It made you strong enough to love a dying baby, and that's the bravest thing. Thank you for reading to me. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for showing me that soldiers never stop serving. I'll tell the other soldiers you're okay now. They're proud of you. You can let go of the guilt. They forgive you. Specialist Connor Mitchell signing off." "Specialist," Frank whispered. "That was my rank. I never told anyone." Rob opened the letter addressed to Ranger. It was mostly a drawing, a crude sketch of a dog with wings, clearly done by someone directing another person's hand. Below it, text read, "Ranger, good boy, best boy ever. Wait for me at Rainbow Bridge. We'll play forever. Guard Hope now. She needs you like I needed you. You save me every day. Now save her. Love, Connor. P.S. Mom's pregnant. It's a girl. Her name should be Hope." Sarah stared at the letter. "We hadn't picked a name. We hadn't even told anyone I was pregnant." Dr. Kate's letter arrived by mail the same afternoon. Someone had mailed it to her. When she called Sarah, she was crying so hard she could barely speak. "He forgave me," she gasped. "Connor's letter says Liam forgives me too. It says Liam is with him. It says Liam told him to tell me, 'Mom, it's okay, let go, be happy.' Those were the exact words I needed to hear. How could Connor know that?" The letter to Whitefish was read at Connor's public memorial service 3 days later. 1,000 people packed the high school gym with overflow in the cafeteria watching on screens. Pastor John read it aloud, his voice breaking multiple times. "Dear Whitefish, thank you for carrying my family when they couldn't walk. You didn't have to help, but you did." That's what love looks like. Not just living near each other, but living for each other. You're all angels who don't know you have wings. Tell your kids you love them. Hug them tonight. Life is short, but love lasts forever. Thank you for showing my family what community means. Love, Connor. James Mitchell, 7 months old, forever grateful. There wasn't a dry eye in the building, but the biggest shock came when Dr. Kate Brennan walked to the stage unannounced. She took the microphone, her face pale but determined. Before 400 people, she confessed everything. Liam, the mercy killing she'd considered, her interference with Connor's care, the morphine syringe, her guilt. She held nothing back. "Connor forgave me before I forgave myself," she said, voice breaking. "His letter said Liam forgives me too. I don't deserve that grace, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it." She announced Liam and Connor's Peace Foundation was officially launching. $2 million had already been pledged. Every penny would help families with terminally ill children access doulas, therapy dogs, counseling, and financial support. "Connor's death won't be meaningless," Kate declared. "His legacy will save lives by teaching families how to grieve with grace." The crowd stood, applauding through tears. Kate looked directly at Sarah and Rob in the front row. "Can you forgive me?" The silence stretched unbearably. Sarah stood slowly, walked to the stage, and faced the woman who'd almost harmed her son. Then she opened her arms. "Yes." They embraced while 1,000 people witnessed forgiveness in action. Cameras captured the moment. It went viral within hours, more than Connor's death, more than his letters. The image of 2 mothers, bound by loss and healing each other through grace, became the symbol of Connor's legacy. That evening, Rob took Ranger to the veterinarian for his limp, which had worsened dramatically. X-rays revealed bone cancer, osteosarcoma, advanced stage, right front leg. The vet estimated Ranger had been in significant pain for months. He hid it, the vet said quietly. German shepherds are stoic, but this would have been excruciating. When did you first notice? Rob thought back. The slight limp had started in December, around when Connor's health declined sharply. Ranger had been dying while guarding a dying baby. How long does he have? Rob asked, dreading the answer. Weeks, maybe a month. I'm sorry. Rob drove home with Ranger in the passenger seat, one hand on the dog's head, tears blurring the road. They'd lose Connor and Ranger within weeks of each other. The cruelty of it was staggering. But that night, something unexpected happened. Ranger's cancer, against all medical odds, began to shrink. Spring arrived in Whitefish with a violence of color that seemed inappropriate for a town still mourning. Snow melted in rushing streams down Main Street. Purple crocuses pushed through frozen ground in defiance of February's cruelty. By March, the world had transformed from monochrome white to explosions of green and yellow and pink. Sarah was 3 months pregnant, visibly showing now, her body creating new life while her heart still grieved the old. The pregnancy had been confirmed by Dr. Anderson the week after Connor's funeral. Amniocentesis at 16 weeks revealed a healthy baby girl with no SMA gene mutations. Hope, Sarah said when they learned the gender. Her name is Hope Elizabeth Mitchell. Rob held her hand during the ultrasound, watching their daughter move on the screen, kicking, turning, vibrantly alive. He felt joy and guilt in equal measure. Was it wrong to be happy? Was happiness a betrayal of Connor's memory? Connor wanted us to be happy, Sarah said, reading his expression. His letter said so. He told us her name would be Hope. They painted a nursery in soft yellow, choosing a different room than Connor's. That space remained untouched, a shrine neither of them could bear to dismantle. Connor's bassinet, his mobile, his blue blanket all stayed exactly where they'd been. But Ranger had other ideas. The German shepherd, whose cancer had inexplicably begun regressing after Connor's death, spent hours in the new nursery. He'd lie in the corner, watching Rob assemble the crib, supervising Sarah as she folded tiny clothes. The vet called Ranger's recovery spontaneous remission, a medical phenomenon occurring in less than 1% of cancer cases, typically unexplained. Dr. Patterson ran tests repeatedly, baffled by the shrinking tumor, the normalizing blood work, the return of Ranger's strength. I've seen this once in 30 years of practice, she admitted. Usually, after extreme stress relief, your dog's body was in survival mode for months, suppressing his immune system to maintain vigilance. When Connor passed, the stress lifted and his immune system kicked into overdrive. Science or miracle? Rob and Sarah didn't care which. Ranger was going to live, and that felt like Connor's final gift. The town planted Connor's garden in the square that March. The design was circular, with a spiral pathway leading to the center where a life-sized bronze statue stood, a German shepherd lying beside a baby's bassinet, the dog's head resting protectively on the edge. The model had been Ranger. The sculptor, a local artist named Patricia Chen, had spent hours photographing him, capturing the exact angle of his devotion. The baby was Connor, blonde hair, peaceful expression, tiny hand reaching toward the dog. The plaque read, "In loving memory of Connor, James Mitchell." July 15, 2023, February 14, 2024. Where love is, death is not the end. Benches circled the garden, each inscribed with quotes from Connor's letters. Perennials were planted, flowers that would return each year, like memory. The unveiling ceremony drew the entire town. Sarah cut the ribbon, her pregnant belly visible beneath her coat. It was the first time she'd smiled in public since Connor died. Rob gave a speech, his voice steady, despite tears. Connor lived 7 months, but his love will bloom here forever. This garden is for anyone grieving. Sit here. Remember. Heal. My son's legacy isn't sadness, it's love persisting." Children began playing in the garden immediately, their laughter echoing off the bronze statue. Elderly residents sat on benches, some crying, some smiling, some doing both. Teenagers gathered respectfully in the evenings, leaving flowers and candles. The garden became Whitefish's heart. Sarah visited daily, talking to the statue as though Connor could hear. Ranger accompanied her always, his limp nearly gone now, his strength returning. One afternoon, a child approached, maybe 5 years old, gap-toothed and curious. "Why is there a dog statue?" she asked. Sarah knelt to the child's level. That dog loved a little boy so much he refused to leave him, even when it hurt, even when he was dying too. He stayed because love is stronger than pain. The child considered this seriously. "That's the best dog ever." "Yes," Sarah agreed, looking at Ranger, who sat patiently beside her. "Yes, he is." April brought another revelation. Frank Harris showed up at the Mitchell home with something wrapped in a blanket, something that wiggled and whined. When he pulled back the fabric, Sarah saw 6 German Shepherd puppies, 4 months old, tumbling over each other in a pile of fur and feet. "Ranger's puppies," Frank explained. "He mated with my Bella last September before anyone knew he was sick. I didn't tell you during Connor's decline, didn't want to burden you, but they're here now and one of them is yours if you want her." Sarah stared at the puppies, then at Ranger, who approached cautiously to sniff his offspring. One puppy, a female with Ranger's exact black and tan markings, broke away from the pack and went straight to Sarah, climbing into her lap. "That one's been looking for you," Frank said. "I call her Grace." Sarah held the puppy against her chest and wept. Happy tears this time. The first she'd cried in months that weren't from grief. Grace licked her face enthusiastically, tail wagging so hard her entire back end shook. "Connor's letter said Ranger should guard Hope," Sarah whispered. "But he can't do it alone forever. He'll need help." They kept Grace. The other 5 puppies went to families who'd been part of Connor's journey. Maggie adopted one she named Jackson Jr. Frank kept one called Sergeant. Dr. Kate's foundation received one for therapy dog training named Liam. The remaining 2 went to other families with children facing terminal illnesses, gifts of protection and love. Ranger took his role as father seriously, teaching Grace everything. How to be gentle, how to be watchful, where to lie beside the bassinet that would soon hold another baby. Sarah watched him train his daughter, preparing her for the mission he'd one day have to pass down. "He's teaching her to protect Hope," Rob observed. "He knows his time will come eventually. He's making sure someone can take over." By May, Dr. Kate's foundation had officially launched from an office in Kalispell. Staff included Kate, 2 grief counselors, and an administrator. Services were free to families, end-of-life doulas, therapy dog placements, financial grants, counseling, and Connor's Letters workshops where people learned to write legacy letters to loved ones. The first family helped was the Johnsons. Their 6-year-old daughter, Emma, had leukemia. They received one of Ranger's puppies and a grief doula who helped them navigate Emma's final months with Grace. Emma lived 3 more months, died peacefully at home with the puppy, now named Star, beside her. "Connor's legacy saved my daughter from dying afraid," Mrs. Johnson told Sarah at Emma's funeral. "Star gave her the same gift Ranger gave Connor. We'll never forget that." The foundation helped 47 families in its first year. Kate worked 18-hour days, pouring her guilt and grief into service. She'd found her redemption in action, her peace in purpose. Summer arrived. Sarah's pregnancy progressed normally. No complications, no scares, just healthy growth. Hope kicked vigorously, especially when Sarah rested her hand on her belly while sitting in Connor's garden. Sometimes Ranger would put his head on her stomach and Hope would kick against him as though she already knew this dog would protect her. On September 12th at 3 a.m., Sarah's water broke. Rob drove her to Kalispell Regional, 40 minutes of white-knuckled steering through mountain roads. Labor lasted 8 hours, shorter than expected, easier than Connor's birth. Hope Elizabeth Mitchell was born at 11:03 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had blonde hair like Connor, blue eyes like Connor, but her own fierce personality that announced itself immediately with a powerful, healthy cry. "She has his eyes," Sarah said, staring at her daughter through tears. "Connor sent her," Rob whispered. "I know he did." They brought Hope home on September 14th. Ranger and Grace waited at the door, alert and ready. When Sarah carried the car seat inside, Ranger approached immediately, sniffed Hope thoroughly, then licked her gently on the forehead. Grace mimicked the gesture, her puppy enthusiasm restrained by Ranger's example. Then both dogs lay down on either side of the bassinet, the same one Connor had used, taking up their posts. "They know," Rob said, watching them. "They know she's family." That first night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood in the nursery doorway, watching Hope in the bassinet, Ranger on the floor to the left, Grace to the right. Both dogs' eyes were open, watchful. Rob found her there at 2 a.m. "You okay?" "I miss Connor so much it physically hurts," Sarah admitted. "But holding Hope, I feel Connor's love, like he's here, in her, protecting her through them." "He is," Rob said. "Love doesn't end. It just changes form." The town welcomed Hope with a celebration at Connor's garden. 200 people attended, bringing gifts practical and sentimental: diapers, clothes, handmade quilts, memory books about Connor for Hope to read someday. Connor's letters were read again, their words taking on new meaning with Hope present. Maggie held Hope and cried happy tears. "She looks like Connor, but she's her own person. She's going to change the world, this one." Frank held Hope with the same careful reverence he'd shown Connor. "Another one to protect. I'm in for the long haul." Even Kate was invited. She held Hope briefly, whispering, "Your brother was extraordinary. I'll make sure you know that." Linda, Sarah's mother, cried as she held her granddaughter. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for Connor the way I should have been. I was so focused on faith that I forgot about love. I won't make that mistake again." February 14th, 2025, marked Connor's first death anniversary. The town held an annual memorial at Connor's garden, a tradition that would continue for years. 500 people attended despite negative 20 degrees, holding candles, sharing memories, celebrating the life that had changed their community. Sarah carried Hope, now 5 months old, bundled in a snowsuit. Rob walked beside her, Ranger moving slowly but steadily at 6 years old, Grace bounding energetically at 11 months. They approached Connor's statue. Sarah placed flowers at the base, blue roses, Connor's favorite color. "Happy Valentine's Day, baby," she whispered. "Your sister is here. She's perfect. Ranger and Grace are taking good care of her, just like you knew they would." Hope reached toward the statue, her baby hand patting the bronze dog's paw. Ranger sat beside the statue, looking up at it, his head tilted as though remembering. Grace sat beside Ranger, mimicking his posture. A photographer captured the moment. Sarah holding Hope, Rob beside her, 2 dogs sitting at attention before the statue of their predecessor's greatest mission. The photo was shared millions of times with the caption, "Love multiplies." Pastor John spoke to the crowd. "1 year ago, we lost Connor. But we gained understanding. Life isn't measured in years, but in impact. Connor's 7 months taught us more than most people learn in 70 years. He taught us about love, community, persistence, and grace. People shared updates. Kate's foundation had helped 47 families. Frank's veteran therapy dog program had matched 12 vets with dogs, all showing improvement. Ranger's 5 other puppies were thriving, 3 now certified therapy dogs. Whitefish's suicide rate had dropped 30%, attributed to the community connectedness that emerged from Connor's story. The national impact was even broader. The hashtag Connors Letters had inspired 2 million people to write legacy letters to loved ones. The movement had spread to schools, hospitals, nursing homes, places where people learned to say, "I love you," before it was too late. After the memorial, Sarah, Rob, Hope, Ranger, and Grace walked home through falling snow. Hope babbled, not words yet, but sounds that felt like joy. Ranger's pace was slower than it used to be, but steady. Grace bounded ahead, then circled back, her protective instincts already developing. They reached home where warmth and light waited. Inside, Maggie had made dinner. Frank was visiting, having become an honorary grandfather. Kyle called from his apartment to check in. Linda, who'd moved closer to help with Hope, sat on the couch holding a photo album of Connor. They ate together, laughed together, told stories about Connor that made Hope gurgle with baby laughter, even though she couldn't understand the words. After dinner, as Hope nursed, Sarah looked around at her makeshift family, built through loss, strengthened by love, held together by a baby who'd lived only 7 months but changed everything. Connor's photo sat on the mantel, his blue eyes watching over them. The same eyes Hope had inherited. The same capacity for love that had taught a town what community truly meant. Outside, snow continued falling. In Connor's garden, candles still burned at the statue's base. Tomorrow, they'd be replaced by fresh ones. Every day, someone in Whitefish left flowers or candles or notes, keeping Connor's memory alive. Inside the Mitchell home, Ranger lay beneath Hope's high chair, Grace beside him, both waiting for dropped food. Old habits from Connor's time continued into Hope's. Rob did dishes, while Sarah rocked Hope to sleep, humming the lullaby Maggie had taught her. Later, as they put Hope in her bassinet, Ranger and Grace took their positions on either side. Ranger looked at Rob, and in those brown eyes, Rob saw understanding, purpose, and peace. "Thank you," Rob whispered to the dog, "for everything, for Connor, for Hope, for teaching us what love looks like." Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor. Acknowledgement, acceptance, completion. Sarah turned off the light, but left the door cracked. She and Rob stood in the hallway, watching their daughter sleep between 2 guardian dogs. "People ask if I've moved on from Connor," Sarah said quietly. "I haven't. I never will. But I've moved forward, with his love in my heart, with Hope in my arms, with Ranger still protecting us. Connor's 7 months changed everything. He taught us that love doesn't end when life does. It multiplies, it spreads, it saves." She paused, tears streaming down her face. Good tears, healing tears. "Thank you, Connor, for everything. We'll carry you forever, until we meet again." Rob pulled her close, and they stood together in the dark hallway of their small Montana cabin, listening to their daughter breathe, to 2 dogs keep watch, to the wind howl outside while warmth remained within. Connor was gone, but his love remained, in Hope, in Ranger, in Grace, in a garden in the town square, in 47 families helped by a foundation, in 12 veterans healing through dogs, in 2 million people who'd written letters they should have written years ago. Love didn't end, it multiplied. And in a small town called Whitefish, Beneath stars that shone bright in the frozen Montana sky, one star seemed to shine brighter than the rest, watching, protecting, loving still. The end. But not really, because love never ends. It just becomes something new, something lasting, something eternal. Connor, James Mitchell, 7 months old, forever loved, forever remembered, forever changing the world, one heart at a time. If you've ever held someone you love while they were slipping away, you know that helpless, hollow ache in your chest, the feeling that you should be able to fix this, stop this, change this, but you can't. Sarah and Rob learned what so many of us eventually face, that the deepest love sometimes means letting go. But here's what Connor's story teaches us that we forget too often in our rush through life. It's not the length of time that matters, it's the depth of connection. 7 months. That's all Connor had. Yet he changed an entire town, healed broken relationships, taught a community what it means to show up for each other. How many of us have years, decades even, and still haven't told the people we love what they mean to us? Connor wrote letters to everyone who mattered before he left. His parents found them after he died, and those words became the healing his family desperately needed. Here's my question for you. If you only had 1 week left, who would you write to, and what would you say? And the harder question, why are you waiting? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the conversations we avoid are the ones we need most.